Starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
So, hello everybody. My name is Mark Sage. I'm the Executive Director of the area, Augmented Reality for Enterprise Alliance. And welcome everybody to our latest webinar around area security research reports. And we have a really excellent team and some interesting areas to cover today, with the theme being overcoming the barriers to AR project implementation, a security perspective. Next slide, please, Tony. Just real quick, just to give you a better understanding of the area and what we do and our members. So as you can see, the area is a global membership-funded non-profit alliance. We purely focus on the enterprise AR space, and we're working together with all the members to accelerate the adoption by supporting the growth of a comprehensive ecosystem. So next slide, please, Tony. So here you can see our members. We're currently 54 members strong. We have customers, or what we call enterprises, that have deployed or are deploying enterprise AR at the moment. We have a number of providers of AR solutions, be it hardware, software, wearables, consultancies, and everything in between. Then we also work with non-commercial organizations, universities, government agencies, research institutes that are often at the leading edge thinking of AR. Next slide, please, Tony. Okay, just to give you an understanding of what the area does, it breaks down into these 4 categories. It's about creating neutral thought leadership content to allow business decision makers to make informed decisions to invest in AR. So it's about defining kind of use cases, so what problems can be solved, showing case studies of actual companies making benefit or gaining benefit from AR. We look at the technologies needed and what the ROI is. Networking opportunities, multiple ways of bringing people together to learn from each other, share experiences, and help develop best practice. We're also very keen on the educate side to make sure we have a steady set of skilled workers, so working with universities and allowing us to help train the next set of workers in AR, and then reducing the barriers to adoption, and this is really important. Next slide, please, Tony. We have a number of different committees, which are, groups of companies working together to look at some of these issues and barriers to adoption. And what we'll be focusing on today is security and the work we've done there. But just to cover, there's a committee in safety. We've defined in a single set of requirements. We have a very strong research capability, looking at what members want research. The area members want to research, and then finally marketing, helping us promote the ecosystem, the members, and the industry generally. Okay, next slide, please, Tony. And just to mention, there's a whole bunch of area webinars that's on the area portal, www.thearea.org. If you go to area resources and area videos, and there's a whole bunch here, and you can see we've done a range of thought leadership content to help, as I said, business decision makers. Okay, next slide, please, Tony. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Tony, who's going to be your chair today. He'll introduce the rest of the team. So enjoy the webinar. Any feedback, please come back to me. Or my apologies, I'll mention one quick other thing. If you have any questions, you can use the webinar tool to put any questions you want to the committee and the panelists here today. It'd be great to get some of your questions as well. So sorry, Tony, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate it. It's great to be on here, and we appreciate everyone taking the time to dial in. Hope you find this information interesting and compelling, and hopefully practically valuable to you. I'm Tony Hodgson. I'm the CEO of Brainwave LLC. We're a global advisory on emerging technology and cybersecurity. We've been involved in work with the area for probably 3 years now, pretty close to the very beginning of the area, and have been excited to watch that grow and the number of members increasing. We also are very fortunate, I'm very fortunate to have senior associates and principals who work on our team that have a combined 50 years of experience in augmented reality and all aspects of it. And some of these folks are true thought leaders, so there's some great resources that are available and have helped contribute to a lot of what you'll see today. Of course, many of us probably on this call already understand that there are lots of benefits to use of AR in the enterprise. It can provide vital information to designers and architects and engineers. It can send information in two-way high quality graphics and video to field personnel and subject matter experts that are remotely located. But also the same sensors and functionalities that make AR so compelling for the enterprise can also be threat doorways. And we'll talk a lot today about security as one of the key barriers to adoption of AR in the enterprise. One of the things that we know is that pilots that are being conducted around AR are proving some extraordinary returns on investment. However, when companies go to take those projects from the pilot phase into a production phase, they're often or very often stopped by the IT and the security teams specifically for security. And there are a number of other reasons why there may be barriers to the seamless, fluid and powerful transition from the pilot phase into production. So that's the topic of this conversation today. And one of the things that you could imagine is if you're in an aircraft production factory or one is working in any sort of national critical infrastructure arena like electrical power plants or offshore oil rigs, that if the data that you're using, the presentation of it is misinterpreted or the integrity of it becomes in question, maybe somebody's even forcing misinformation into the system or monitoring worker location and activities, then there could be some truly significant and negative impacts. So we want to try to address those today. And when it comes to some of the other barriers, in addition to security, we've got the enterprise having to work in a lot of cases with consumer hardware that nobody's really familiar with and certainly haven't been hardened from a security perspective. There's education of the workforce, there's safety factors. Is the talent out there and even available to use some of these things to their fullest? These are some of the things that we'll discuss on the call today. And so all of that in total, it's time for an adult conversation on how to overcome these challenges and see if collectively working together we can accelerate the injection of this incredible new medium and these solutions into industry to bring the benefits to their full fruition. So the call today is really for those of you out there who may be enterprise managers who are looking to perhaps implement AR solutions. It's also for device vendors and application developers who are developing various solutions and looking to take those solutions out and deploy them at scale. Also, it's for system integrators who may be pulling all those pieces together and working on behalf of the enterprise. You certainly would not want to introduce anything that might in any way negatively impact the pace of the production and activities of the enterprise. And certainly, of course, nobody wants to introduce some sort of threat doorway that could cause harm to people or infrastructure. We're fortunate today that we have a really great panel who are going to help us. First of all, I'd like to have each of these folks introduce themselves one at a time. I would mention that Vladimir Beliowski with Bosch is unable to make the call here this morning. He's having some difficulties connecting, so we're going to continue trying to work and getting him online. In the meantime, Stan, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, I'm Stan Hanks. I'm the Chief Architect and CISO at RealWear. RealWear is a manufacturer of an industrial wearable computing device that has AR characteristics. It's actually, if you look at the picture of Ben Kales next to me, he's wearing one of our devices. We're proud that Welsh Water is a customer. And I'm happy to be here this morning.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben.
Hi there. So yeah, I'm from Welsh Water, as mentioned by Stan. We're here in the UK. We have like over 3,500 staff. We produce clean water for 3.5 million customers and take away the waste of water and then clean it before turning it to rivers and oceans. I got involved with Area as I'm part of our twice-winning award-winning innovation program, which includes AR. So from that stage is where we got through to Area.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Bob?
Yeah, good morning. My name is Bob Lavelle. I'm a partner with Brainwave LLC. Brainwave chairs the cybersecurity or security working group under the Area. I'm also a co-author of the Area technical reports around wearable enterprise AR security. Prior to my Brainwave work, I spent 25 years with the IEEE in the Standards Association. I was a senior director overseeing emerging technology. Some of my projects that I was responsible for was the IEEE Cybersecurity Initiative, Open Interoperable AR and VR, and industry connections programs around malware, stop e-crime, malware, metadata exchange, and privilege management protocols. I've also held a few board seats, one for the APWG, which is a cybersecurity not-for-profit, the Cantarin Initiative, which is a privacy not-for-profit, and I was a member of the Internet Technology Advisory Committee for the OECD. Thank you and good morning.
Great. Thank you very much, Bob. So we're going to start in here to find out a little bit more about what some of these barriers are to adoption. And we're not really here to lament about those, but really looking for these folks to share their insights and ideas. Also, we definitely want to address any questions that the audience may have here. And we want to find something that's practical that you can take back with you to your jobs. So first of all, we're going to touch on those barriers. We're going to talk a little bit about the state of AR security in the enterprise. We're going to talk about other types of business challenges and networks, trusted networks, and factors that may impact effectiveness there. So let's start off with a quick rapid fire of the panel, maybe sharing 2 or 3 of your biggest challenges or barriers that you've seen out there that you think people are going to be facing as they go to implement these kind of solutions. Stan, would you start us off, please?
Sure. We've seen a lot of customers do pilot projects and early deployment trials that go swimmingly well, but the 2 problems that they run into are ongoing support and operations support from the IT group once they get ready to take it into a production environment. And the second is corporate security, because this adds an entirely different threat surface to the environment than anything else that they've put out there before.
Great, thank you, Stan. Bob, how about yourself?
Yeah, sure. One of the main areas that we've seen when deploying any kind of emerging or cutting-edge technology was the lack of a sufficient test bed or better labs within the organization and or the processes. We found that a lot of the labs are set up to show the possibilities, the positives of a technology they're bringing in, and not to show how to integrate into the production systems. We also have seen that security of devices and technology is often an afterthought. And I would say the second big issue or challenge I've seen is a lack of trust between the organization bringing the technology or new technologies in and the IT team or security team. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. It seems like the challenges are really fairly rounded. The security may be leading that list, but certainly there's a number of other things, factors to consider. So when it comes to these barriers, Ben, can you talk with us a little bit about, from your perspective, what you think is needed? Maybe one or two barriers or challenges that you've seen and actions that might be taken in order to overcome those.
Yeah, sure. So one of the main challenges that we've had was going out to site is basically the education of our staff, of our colleagues. It's a huge change in their day-to-day roles that we're putting to them. That they are normally using pen and paper to go around and do their daily tasks, and we're going to be putting a tablet on in their hands or a headset on their heads, and it's this massive culture change for them. All benefits their day-to-day role, they just don't really know it yet.
Great. Stan or Bob, could you add anything here?
Well, excuse me. One of the problems, that was an excellent point that was mentioned there, that most of the lab trials are designed to show what you can do with it, as opposed to designed to show the potential problems. And that's a reality check for a lot of people. We're also experiencing something that Honeywell has called the great shift change, where there are a lot of older workers about ready to cycle out of the workforce, and the new replacement workers are in their early to mid-20s, and they're digital natives. They grew up with digital devices as just part of their life, and they're ready. They readily embrace this type of technology, and it may be a little bit of a challenge for some of the older workers to as readily embrace it. So you wind up with a potential culture conflict between people that get really excited about this type of deployment and people that are skeptical of it.
On that, Stan, you actually see also the challenge around safety issues crop up, right? So a lot of the new technologies are designed to step you through every step in a necessary checklist to ensure safety or security. And some of the things you'll find is the transfer of that knowledge transfer you're talking about, sometimes doesn't happen because the individual that was working in that space just didn't write it down. It was a course of their every day, so they walk through it. So being able to transfer that you almost need an interpreter that sits between that the non-digital and the new workforce that's coming in. Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that's exactly it, because for a number of years and decades even, knowledge was gained by hands-on training and hands-on experience with people that could walk you through the things that you needed to do. And now we've got people that learn everything off of YouTube videos, and that content doesn't exist for some of this equipment. It's an interesting challenge, to be sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's fair also to say that the capabilities to potentially have a remote connectivity to subject matter experts can certainly help in the new workers being able to hopefully contact subject matter experts who may be dwindling in number, but through this technology able to sort of multiply their presence and support of the field workers. Another thing in terms of a barrier, I would imagine, are the lack of basic preparation or conditioning of the enterprise data and networks, et cetera, to support these new systems as people are bringing the wearables into the workspace. Have you guys had any experience with companies just simply not being ready and positioned to even adopt these solutions if they wanted to?
Yeah, so where I was going to go with that, and actually you triggered a thought there. One of the things is some of the assumptions with the wearables, and that is a always-on technology. You don't always have access to the information. So you mentioned remote work or remote assistance. It can be challenging given some of the environments. given the where 5G is in the rollout stage, where connectivity is. So there's a lot that needs to be worked out and ironed out to move the data or the resource closer to the device until that part of the infrastructure builds up.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Even in most of our industrial deployments, if you walk into a factory, if you walk into a warehouse, if you walk into any place that there's been an industrial deployment, it's like a giant Faraday cage. There's enough steel there that it's extremely difficult to get RF signal in. And if you're really serious about doing a good deployment, one of the things you have to think about is where people are going to be, and do you have enough network there for it to be possible for them to do the things that you're wanting to do? Conversely, you also have to think about, from the software perspective, does the software support sometimes connected services? Because you will, with some frequency, walk out from under the radio coverage umbrella, whether it's 4G, 5G, or Wi-Fi, and just be an island on your own. And if everything breaks at that point, then that's a problem. And frankly, that can actually be a safety issue as well, because if you're counting on always on connectivity to provide some safety net or to provide some audit trail, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a position where you're not connected. So thinking about things like that is a critical part of getting a deployment right, and frankly, it's one of the barriers as well.
Ben, and for the rest of you, can you talk a little bit about the security of the data specifically, and is encryption appropriate approach? Is it sufficient? What about like user authentication? What sort of factors are around that topical area?
So because ours is still a proof of concept at the moment, we haven't gone and connected it to our network, so we haven't tried for user logons just yet. But that is where we're trying to get to. So we would ask the device to be able to ask our network for user login, or we use a program called Mobile Iron for our mobile phones, which we are trying to get onto tablets for our apps and things like that to go through. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. Stan, how about you and your implementations? How are customers dealing with that, the security of the data itself?
Well, it kind of varies. Everybody's got a different rubric for how they grade on this. My personal background includes a lot of critical infrastructure and national security deployments. So I natively think about this differently, that the data should be identifiable to a specific individual rather than necessarily just a specific device, and that it should be encrypted as soon as it's created and then remain encrypted all the way through its life cycle. For a lot of people, that's overkill. There are a lot of software packages that don't support that, but it's the safest thing to do. Device, when you look at the way companies value their business processes, their intellectual property, their trade secrets, for many of these organizations, just having a camera present is a huge threat. They get really, really resistant to the idea of somebody is walking around a secure trade secret business process manufacturing area with a camera on their head. And that's a notion that this guy might somehow, have pictures that would provide significant benefit to their competitors. Setting in a device that somehow goes missing is just borderline terrifying. And so they worry about that stuff. And at the same time, they also worry about the fact that the data has to go someplace to be useful. And in that transit, that it's at risk as well. But it's not just about device-originated data. It's also about other data, because one of the key use cases that we see for devices like this is replacement of clipboards. Because if I've got a checklist process that I'm supposed to go through over the course of my day, if I can do that in software on a hands-free device, I get my hand back. I don't have to carry a clipboard. I don't have to pause and write. I can verbally annotate my work. I can take photos as I go to document what I'm doing. It gives me a great productivity boost. Well, that means that the software that is being provided to me and the workflow information that's being provided to me must also be transmitted in a secure fashion, or somebody else can pick that off and potentially use it to my detriment. So it's a two-way street, and it's something it's a big issue for a lot of industrial customers because their processes are different. This isn't Facebook where posting what you're doing to everybody to see and comment on is acceptable. That's not even acceptable within the company. It's a different culture, a different kind of environment.
But you put yourself, right, stand in the same situation that we've dealt with for years, right? Encryption, and I come from a very similar background where I'm worried about everything being encrypted from point to point and in rest and in transit, blah. So same challenge comes down. We're bringing in new technologies where the communication methodology or mechanism varies in speed. It varies in the amount of connectivity from place to place, and how is a clipboard or something like that when you're inside of an industrial setting a useful thing if your information is delayed? So what is the processing power and storage capability closest to your device or on your device? So we're working through all these at this point, right? We're in fact, everybody that's listening to this call is probably sitting in a pioneering position. We're looking to solve some of these things as the new technologies come and become deployed. Thanks.
Great, thank you guys. Let's move to another sort of related topic, which is if security is a concern and the IT and IT security and even management teams are stopping full-scale deployment of some of these pilot programs and AR solutions, what is it that they're concerned about, and how can the various stakeholders help increase the confidence level and comfort of those folks in order to gain their approval? You know, what's necessary from a process standpoint, what's necessary from a relationship standpoint? Ben, can you talk a little bit about how you view that and what you think can be done?
Yeah, sure. So to get when we started our proof of concept idea, we knew from the get-go that we would need to be connected into our IT networks. So we got our IT departments and procurement and our security departments involved from the beginning, and that's helped us along the way massively. So when it came to the final meeting that we had with our security teams, asking them to finally try and connect it in, we were expecting quite a big pushback because they said it is security basically, and our security for other products and things like that is quite robust. So, but because we've involved them from the get-go, from the start, they knew exactly what was coming and they were prepared for it, and it was relatively painless meeting.
Excellent. It's good to hear good news like that. And I'm wondering, Bob, what sort of factors do you think are important with regard to that security team and that relationship?
Okay, so first, the question you asked first was, what are they concerned about? What is the security team concerned about? Everything, the unknown. Every variable for somebody with those responsibilities is considered a threat. So when they look at this, they have to look at it from a multiple levels, right? Do I trust the individual that I'm working on this for? Are they going to throw me under the bus when I don't deploy or open these ports or allow this to be connected? Do I trust the management above me to be in support of this? And how did I gain that trust? Gain the trust by first including them early, as Ben had said. It doesn't hurt to ask their advice. I find speaking the security language, even Security 101 helps. So any kind of training you can get there, try to understand their position. They're not there to hold your stuff back. That's not even in their focus. Their focus is to maintain the status quo. Their focus is to make sure what was operating yesterday flawlessly and uncompromised is operating today. So from my vantage point, it's all about building up trust. Trust is built over a series of interactions with mutual positive outcomes. So, and it should always be remembered that trust gets burned really fast. It takes a long time to build it, and it takes one incident for it to go down. Thank you.
Stan, you have to be on the front lines of communicating with those IT security teams, I would imagine.
Oh,
and
gosh.
yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What can make them happy, and what can solution providers do in order to be proactive in that? And what about the actual enterprise managers? What can they do in order to help make that relationship good and speed through a positive certification of these solutions?
Well, it helps to understand that being a security professional in an organization is one of the most difficult jobs that there is. Security is a lot like insurance, right? If you have an incident, you're like, oh my God, we don't have enough. And if you don't have an incident, you complain about how much you're paying for this thing that you're not actually using. No one ever gets kudos for the attacks that don't happen and the data loss that doesn't happen. It's invisible, right? So these guys are underfunded, and they've got a lot of stress. Most of them take their jobs very seriously. So understanding that they're stressed and they're busy, a lot of times the communication is not spectacular. So many times as a BU owner inside an organization, or as a process manager, or wherever you fit into the food chain, you get these 3-ring binders full of security policies. Well, this is the way it must be. And no one really gives you the context as to why that's true. And sometimes, in better run organizations have training sessions, and their objective is to pull everybody into the same viewpoint, and they explain why this is the way we're doing things, and try to build a culture of we're all in this together. Other organizations don't do such a good job, and as a result, many people have a negative viewpoint with respect to the security organization, because they see them as either requiring you to do things that don't make any sense, or preventing you from doing things that make perfect sense to you. So finding somebody in a security organization to work with is pretty critical. One of the interesting things is that AR, VR, wearable technology, all of that stuff is significantly more interesting than, say, normal desktop IT. So if you can make an inroad into both the corporate IT divisions and into security, and say, would you guys like to play with this really cool stuff that we're about to deploy? You can make friends really pretty easily. One of the other pieces that go along with this is if your pilot is successful and this goes to full deployment, this is now going to require additional manpower and additional budget on the part of the organizations that support it. So corporate IT and security both are going to potentially have budget impact by this deployment. And that's typically not thought about from an enterprise BU perspective. When I was running BUs inside enterprises, I thought about, how this was going to affect me. I had to have budget to buy the equipment. I had to have training. I had to have the software tooling technique. I was going to spend this much. I was going to get this much back out of it. It's all good. What wasn't critically obvious was the fact that that was also going to require multi-million-dollar expenditures on the part of other organizations to support this thing that I was doing that wasn't already in their budget. So the earlier you can start getting people involved in the process, the earlier you can have them start thinking about, no, really, if this actually deploys, what's it going to look like? So that you can start getting factored into budget cycles. And you can also make sure that in your budgeting process that you understand that it's not just about the money you need, it's about money that other people need. You need additional staff over here. You may need to upgrade the Wi-Fi network over here. You may need some additional security audits over there. Understanding that it's an ecosystem and it's not just a point deployment is one of the things that you can do to be much more successful in your efforts.
Yeah. So what that brings up is rather than approaching this relationship and the conversations with the IT security and the IT teams in an ad hoc fashion, we felt when we were doing the area security study that maybe there were some guidelines out there or some tools that we could use, some frameworks that would be helpful in that. And just to quickly find out, I mean, Ben, did you, when you've been working to build up your system, your solution, and working with IT and security, was there any sort of framework or standards that you utilized to help with that, or did you have any requirement for that?
Essentially, no, there wasn't really any main frameworks or standards. We always had free reign just to begin with. Basically, we were asked just to bring innovation into our teams and the way we work. So we came up with the idea of our interactive works operating manual, and we just incorporated AR into it to better include the safety aspects and point of interest mapping and navigation around our sites.
Yeah, very good. Well, one of the benefits that the area provides to industry is to try to look in areas where, you know, if that worked for and is working for you to deal in your particular situation, are there other instances where some kind of tools or aids might be valuable, or if there had been some type of tools or aids available to you, would that have helped speed up and improve the quality of getting your solution developed and deployed? And so let me go to the next slide here. Bob, I'm going to let you talk this over here, but well, I'll just let you hit the slide, if you will, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Well, I think that where Tony was going is when you're bringing new technologies in, when you're bringing advancing technologies, it's always good to look around, do a comparative study, see what's worked, what didn't work, stand on the shoulders of giants. It's why the OSI model works, the technology stack works. Things are handled at specific levels, and if you look at that when people have come together and they've vetted a particular solution, take a look at it and see if it works for you. It actually will speed up large portions of your ability to move these type of technologies from your pilot systems into a production system. And in the certification bodies, as well as the insurance providers, like to see it. So when we were looking at doing a framework for the AR wearables in the enterprise, we took a gander around. We looked and we said, oh, there's not a lot of work in this space. Now, what we did find is there's a lot of work at the lower levels or in compatible technologies, but they don't actually fill all the gaps. So what we did is we looked at grabbing the bottom layer of this pyramid that you're seeing, being able to leverage the work that was done there, and then we, on top of that, created a framework and a set of protocols to be able to address what we saw as gaps in that. Now, the lower levels are pretty well known. I mean, NIST is out there. The cybersecurity framework it's very solid. It's established by a government, private sector collaboration. It provides industry standards and best practices for managing cybersecurity risks. We found that as a very useful document or series of documents to be able to leverage when we were looking at what we were asked to provide. The Open Web Application Security Project, OWASP, same type of thing. It's a nonprofit focused on improving software security. It provides resources to build and maintain security mobile and IoT apps by classifying security risks and providing developmental controls to reduce the impact or the likelihood of exploitation. And then the IEEE Cybersecurity Initiative. It was launched to provide the go-to online presence for security and privacy, including a sandbox, although lightweight, a sandbox to allow testing. On top of that, we saw that ISO and IEC 27000 family of standards helps to organize and keep sensitive information assets secure through implementation of information security management system requirements. So it was again, we looked at the bottom portion of it. What can we do here? Where are the risks associated? Here's the other piece of it that allows us to classify And along that, and on the same level, we are looking at the Industrial Internet Consortium's IISF, which is also a framework, a best practices for assessing and managing cybersecurity in IoT systems. So with that as a foundation and a reference model, we looked for where there were gaps in what they were looking at and how they were handling it, assessing it. And that's where the area framework comes into play. Thank you, Tony.
Great, thank you. So I want to tell you folks on the call a little bit more about the security reports that the area is going to open up and make publicly available today, sort of the approach that we took there so that you can understand where the real benefit lies and how you might be able to use those. So, oops, advance the right one. So first of all, we looked at where the threats potentially exist, and we divided up the architecture into the various logical and physical and software elements, and looked at where there are borders between the various elements, and then drew trust boundaries, what we call it, around each of those elements so that we could look at what's coming in and what's going out. So if you may be able to ensure the security and the trust within any of these elements, but then as you go to move the data and the activities into the other areas, that's where you may encounter various threats. And we looked at some real world use cases in order to kind of use those as a measuring point and a starting point to consider this. All of this is explained in much greater detail, of course, in these reports, but we then broke down, started with the headset itself, and we broke it down into the various elements of the headsets, the sensors and the software engines that we're accepting in various media or real world data. We looked at the various elements of software functionally inside the headsets that recognize the scene and then compose it in order for display. One important element here is that we clearly identified that many of the threats, or a large fraction of the threats that AR solutions represent to the enterprise, don't necessarily have to do with someone hacking that device or even hacking in and through that device and getting to other data that's out in the network. One of the big areas of concern is that all of the sensor data is providing information that could then be used by nefarious characters in other ways. So there's a bridge between the cyber world and the actual physical world. So what do I mean there? Well, if you have 25 people walking around your aircraft manufacturing plant and they're recording data, you have potentially the ability to see all of those people and what they're doing and understand intellectual property and other status of their business that they would rather people don't need to know. Also, they very likely are recording every exit and entrance into that plant, even as far as recording the location of security cameras. And if you watch closely enough and they aren't careful about this, they'll record even people entering keypad entries in order to gain access to different areas. So that's an important area to consider. So how we built the framework generally is in 3 sections. And the first one is to help identify what the security requirements are in the first place. Not everyone needs to build a Fort Knox solution. They're very expensive. And so what are the potential threats? And what are our requirements related to those threats? Do we need a really serious capability to guard against that threat? Or is it probably not that likely? Or even if that threat is acted upon, is the consequence of that serious for us? So then in phase 2, we're looking at the actual security design of the solution. What are the elements of the solution? And then what are the various aspects of those solutions that are potential threat doorways? And then in the third phase, we look at, okay, how can you as a member of the stakeholder team for one of these projects and how can we support you with active penetration testing? What do you need to be looking for and requiring of people who are helping you from a penetration perspective? Can these threats in the real world actually be acted upon? And if they do, what is the actual potential impact of that? So for each one of these phases, we have various goals that the users or the actors should be concerned about, and then various methods that you can take in order to achieve those goals. So ultimately, we take this security framework, which is kind of an architecture, we turn it into the test protocol, which is also presented, which is effectively a step-by-step recipe for stepping down through your solutions. So if you're an enterprise manager, you can assess where your solutions are right now from a security perspective and where you have gaps. Or if you're a project manager, you can look at your vendors and you can look at where the solutions that they're providing are meeting or not meeting potential requirements that you have. On the other side of the table, if you're a vendor, a software vendor or hardware vendor, you want to get your solutions in and you certainly don't want to cause any problems, you can use the framework in order to self-assess where you are from a security perspective and also proactively develop materials or guided conversations that you can have with a customer in order to logically and in a distinct fashion move through these various areas and being able to have effective conversations. So if these tools can help guide the relationships, help build a common vocabulary, and help you get through more powerfully these security elements that are necessary in order to get certified and out there into production, then the area will have provided something of real value. So I'd like to turn it over to questions from the audience at this point. I don't see any in here at the moment. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? And if you do, please go ahead and just type those into the question box. In the meantime, I'd like to ask the panel if you have any additional thoughts based on where we're at in the conversation right now.
Well, one of my observations over a lot of these deployments is that security is a process, and that most of the time, as a business unit operator, you have targets that you're trying to hit, and if you're working cooperatively with the security departments and the IT departments, most of the time, even if you're not really in a fully ready, fully compliant state, if you're working with them and you've got a plan and there's a roadmap and everybody's bought into it, they'll help you get there. It's not an on-off switch, and that's something that's easy to lose sight of. That this is all a negotiation, and at the end of the day, they're trying to make sure that you can continue to operate as opposed to preventing you from operating, and that's they'll help you, but you need to be able to work with them to make that happen.
Stan, whose responsibility is it to ensure the security of these solutions in the enterprise?
It's, in my view, it's really the responsibility of the business unit process owner that's seeking the deployment to make sure that they have complied with the requirements. And to that end, they're going to need to work with their hardware vendors, their software vendors. They're going to need to work with their internal IT in the infrastructure and support organizations. And they're going to need to work with the corporate security team, whose primary objective is to validate compliance. They're not necessarily there to provide you with, effectively armed border guards. They're going to come by once in a while and basically make sure that you're compliant with the representations that they have made to the senior management team about the state of security in the organization.
So then I guess it's important, if you can, to help influence those requirements? I mean, it sounds really like quite a challenging job.
Well, the requirements oftentimes are not strictly negotiable. One of the things that I discovered that surprised me, frankly, over the course of the last year doing this is that many of the requirements are actually driven by insurance. That in order to be able to get corporate directors and officers insurance, most companies are required to have a cyber insurance policy, and the cyber policy requires that in order to get underwriting, that you certify that you're compliant with a list of standards and industry best standards, as they call them, about how you operate your networks and your systems and your software. And that's typically not negotiable because the board of directors has handed it down to the CEO, who's handed it down to the CISO, who's handed that down to the security teams and the IT departments. And you don't get to tell them that they can't ask you to do that. What you can do is come back and say, you know, that's not like completely reasonable, because what we're really trying to do is solve for this particular threat. And here's the things that we've done that aren't completely in alignment with the specifics that you're asking for, that indicate that we've solved for what they're asking for, and can negotiate your way into an agreement that you're clear to operate. But the specific requirements, you may not have the opportunity to impact very much, because that's typically coming from somebody that's extra organizational.
Right, right. Karen has asked, how do you respond to companies who say that the security risk is just really not worth the gain of using AR solutions?
Actually, I say, thank you. I appreciate your viewpoint. Have a nice day, and go talk to another customer. That's not an argument worth having. They either, and it's also universally true that none of this is universally true. There are, as an enthusiast, as a partisan, I'm inclined to believe that everybody's life can be improved by an application of this type of technology. And the reality is that's probably not true. And there are people for whom this is not a good fit.
That's true, Stan. But I think that as a advocate of the field or technology itself, I believe that there's a missing component of education. And what we're seeing right now, we're dealing with this in an enterprise, right? A controlled subset of the world. And there are rules that are dictated from the top, requirements and insurance policies and the likes. But what I find is, to answer Tony's question earlier on, and was who's responsible? Every human's responsible. Now, who's accountable? Usually that falls unfortunately on the CTO, CIO, or that, and that rolls downhill to security staff, firewall managers, and the likes. But I think that as all these technologies start to make it to the forefront, there's a lot of fear factors that come into play. If you haven't seen the series of Black Mirrors, watch 2 of them. I can't watch them anymore. It makes me want to come out of completely the technology field. Like, this is where we're going. I can't do that. So, but what I think is true education, both on the security side of it, your security professionals are not there to stop you from progressing your job and making your job easier. It's not their work. And to understand that all these things, just about everything that happens in the corporate world happens in your personal world as well. So you should understand the overlap, that piece that you take home with you, whether you're taking your device home or not. The privacy, I had a colleague tell me privacy is dead. I refuse to accept this, but privacy is really threatened. So a lot of information that's being taken from these devices, put out into the real world, again, aggregated, and calculations are made based on it. These can become scary. So understanding the pieces in a controlled environment that your IT security staff are trying to enforce, instill in you, it goes a long way. Thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent. Ulrich has asked if we actually reviewed specific devices and how they compromise security or security requirements, and I'll just answer that. In the course of doing the study and developing these reports, we did extensive hands-on testing with quite a number of devices that were provided by various vendors. As you might imagine, and wasn't surprising, they're not actually excited about public release of the findings that we had. However, hopefully some of the conversations we've had about that with those folks have helped to influence how they're approaching security now, and in some cases I know that they actually have. So also, let's see, we have anybody else? Bob, you want to say anything else about that, the hands-on testing?
Nope, you covered it.
Okay, very good. The next one is from Mike Hill, who asked about challenges specifically related to authenticating users and to augmented data in national critical infrastructure use cases, and how much of a barrier has that been towards deeper adoption of AR?
Well, I could tell you that I'm working very closely with a company that is working on the actual standards being formed for national critical infrastructure that has some interesting technology solutions that I'd characterize as not quite ready for prime time, but super promising. It's a big deal. It's a huge issue. Being able to provide identity management that you can, with great surety, says this specific individual at this specific time did this thing is super important, and having that being done in a way that isn't spoofable, so that I can't authenticate myself and then hand off my device to somebody else and then operate as though it's me. It's a huge deal. It's an ongoing research and development area. Super exciting stuff happening in that space. I'm looking forward to developments that are going to roll out in there, particularly towards mid-year this year.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I want to touch real quickly on the fact that we do have these 2 area reports that we are now releasing to the public. We will send out an email to each of you who registered for and attended the conference here, and we'll also make them more generally available to a page on the area site where you can download these reports. The first report itself is the overall approach that we took and the results of the research that we did and development of that standard equivalence pyramid that you saw, which led to the development of the security framework and test protocol, which is provided in the second report. We hope that you find these very useful, and we would love your feedback. This wasn't meant to be a definitive solution to these issues. It was meant to be the starting point for conversation and ongoing development of even stronger capabilities over a period of time. Mark, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I would like to thank the panelists for their participation, and I'll give it to you now.
Thank you, Tony. And again, my thanks to the panelists. It's been a really interesting conversation, debate, and insight into the area of AR security. And just a reminder for everybody else, the area has a number of different committees. We talked about security today, but we have a similar set of work around safety. Our research committee, which actually delivered these first sets of reports, which we've decided to make available for everybody, but we have some member-only research focusing on an ROI calculator and human factors and safety framework. And we're also about to deliver a real deep dive into the barriers of adoption, barriers to adoption, and how to overcome them in the manufacturing industry, as well as some of the other benefits I mentioned earlier. So if you're interested in the area, and I'd be happy to have a conversation with you to talk about the kind of work and the members and things like that, please feel free to drop me an email at mark@thearea.org. So finally, thank you very much. You will receive an email the next day or so with the recording, a link to the recording and the reports, as Tony said. And, we need to work together as an ecosystem to make sure that AR does become and is continuing to be, deliver benefit to organizations and become a great technology. So I wish you all best in your AR endeavors, and thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
I know.